Okay. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hope you're doing well. We are continuing our reading of Friedrich Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra book. And we're getting close to the end, so I kind of want to plow through it so that we can focus on the other texts. And let us begin. It's a beautiful day. And we were dealing with the subject of retired. And he's already spoken to the kings, the magician. So let's see where he can keep going, okay? He's talking to the member of the old pope. An old pope. Let's begin. Bismillah. He was a concealed god, addicted to secrecy. Verily, even a son he got himself in a sneaky way. At the door of his faith stands adultery. Whoever praises him as a god of love does not have high enough opinion of love itself. Now this is a very interesting analysis for us to begin. Now, the god of love, the opinion of love itself. Now, one thing that I have mentioned in the past that I enjoy about Islam is that we don't say God is love and love is God. We hear fear Allah. You know, the Christians are the ones who, say, well, God is love, man. Free love. Love is love. And they have opened the door for the Rainbow Mafia, right? Now, it doesn't, like how would I put this in a way? You have the Greeks with their pagan, like, oh, she's the goddess of love, Aphrodite. The Eros, Cupid, Valentine's Day traditions, right? Well, we say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is free of need. Okay? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't need to love you. And you, as a Muslim, can love Allah, but your love isn't something that's going to control him, and if you don't give him your love, it's not going to affect him, right? So we don't really have this sort of love worship, this cultish love guru crap. Did this God not want to be a judge too? But the lover loves beyond reward and retribution. Now this is an interesting angle here. If you love someone, you can judge them. But sometimes, even if you love someone, you have to pass the sentence, right? So when you come into women being female judges, persuaded by tears, emotion, and the softness bleeding heart, unless you're Judge Judy. But the lover loves beyond reward and retribution. Love for the sake of love. When he was young, this god out of the Orient, he was harsh and vengeful, and he built himself a hell to amuse his favorites. Eventually, however, he became old and soft and mellow and pitying, more like a grandfather than a father. Now here you see, this is a great one right here. Energy. Your dad, you don't want to piss off your dad. Your grandpa is like your old guy who's going to be like, hey, knock that off. Stop that shenanigans. There's a different energy with your dad when he's younger than with your old grandpa who's walking with a cane and trying to get by. But most like a shaky old grandmother. Then he sat in his nook by the hearth, wilted, grieving over his weak legs, weary of the world, weary of willing, and one day he choked on all his all too great pity. So grieving over his weak legs, weary of the world. I think I'm not old yet, even though I can feel like that sometimes. But there's no doubt about it that, I think, how do I put it? When you get to a certain age, depending on your health, you're ready to go. You're ready to clock out. But it's up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when He's going to take you. And your weakness and your weariness and your pity, you're just like, I want to be returned to Allah. Especially people who suffer with a dilapidating disease like cancer, right? These are people who They become very weary. So when Nietzsche is mentioning a shaky old grandma, mellow, pitying, old, soft, you really can picture the scene he's talking about. You old Pope, Zarathustra interrupted at this point. Did you see that with your own eyes? Surely it is might have happened that way. That way. And also in some other way. When gods die, they always die several kinds of death. But, well then, this way or that, this way and that, he is gone. Now, this is a tricky line right here. When gods die, they die several kinds of death. I don't take that as a literal, he thinks, only the Christians believe. Well, that's not true. The Hindus have, how did Ganesh get his head murked off? The elephant dude. He was a little boy. His dad came home and thought he was somebody else and sliced off his own son's head and replaced it with an elephant head. I'm butchering that so concisely, but that's the gist of it. But he didn't necessarily die. But Christians are the ones who think Jesus died. You know? That a God can bleed, a God can cry, a God can scream out in pain for his own creation. We don't believe that as Muslims, you know? Allah is eternal, cannot die, will not die. For something to die, that denotes weakness. That denotes frailty. You can't be all-powerful and then die at the same time. That just doesn't make sense. Because that would mean death can overcome God. When death is when God is the disposer of death, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who will decide when you'll return to him. Death doesn't go to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and say, now I'll take you out. But Christians have a very convoluted thing where Jesus died and then rose again, the whole Easter thing. But when Nietzsche is talking here, I think he's talking about people who are Assalamu alaikum. I think he's talking about, you know, in the movie like Troy, Brad Pitt is Achilles, and there's a very good fighters. When you see him take down men on the battlefield, great warriors, people will say, hey, how are you so great at what you do? And then he dies, right? So they are icons of what they do. They are steadfast in their discipline. Titans of industry would be a good name. Titans of industry. And how they pass away. Isa says, I've been doing so much better staying away from zina and made it clear with her. Oh, mashallah. I remember that case he was talking about long ago. Hope you're doing well. That's good. So, you have like a mafia boss. He's like the guy who's the head honcho. He's not a god. But they're like powerful people. And some of them die like dogs. Worse than dogs. Okay? That's what I picture. Is people who think themselves to be gods. And then they die in all these different ways. But we know as Muslims there's only one God. And we don't allow people to call themselves God. Assalamu alaikum, Sherry. He offended the taste of my ears and eyes. I do not want to say anything worse about him, now that he is dead. I love all that looks bright and speaks honestly. So I love all that looks bright and speaks honestly. So how do you ever seen someone who looks really gray after, you know, when you smoke blunts, weed, you look really pasty and sickly and gray. In Islam, when you stay pure, you're doing good, you're on your deen, you get that nur, you get that light. And it's fantastic. There's like a glow because you're doing righteousness, right? I want you to think about something. Women will put bronzer and different styles of makeup on to give their face the illusion. Like really nasty women who are going around town on the carousel, right? if you saw them without makeup, I feel truly like your eyes would perceive the sin oozing from their pores. They would look like a dilapidated vampire. But because makeup gives you the artificial shine, a counterfeit glow, this tricks the man into thinking this is a clean woman, this is a good woman, right? And this is why makeup is such an illusory tool of manipulation. Because you want to see something bright, vibrant, healthy, pure. But makeup confuses the male brain because of how you can put shimmering powders in the substances themselves, right? And so our eyes crave people who have this sort of light in them, this sort of goodness in them. And we're more easily tricked now, I'd argue, because we've lost that ability to see people's faces for what they are because of how they paint it, right? But the eyes also can have a glow. I don't know if you've ever had like a nice doctor and like you can see in their eyes there's like a twinkle. They care about you. But then you can see a scary nurse who has like shark eyes and you're like, oh man, I'm afraid of this lady. And so when he says, I love all that looks bright and speaks honestly, when someone is very sneaky and lies a lot, there's like their body kind of changes, you know? They're like decrepit. You know, there's just something so fake about it that you can perceive it. It's slimy. And honesty can still hurt. See that? Because when honesty doesn't have to always be sugar coated. Even though you want to make it smooth, but it doesn't always have to be rose-colored glasses. So, think about brightness for a second. Let's dig into this. Brightness can be so bright that it like almost blinds you, or it can be in a dark room, a little tiny bright candle that leads you out of that dark tunnel, right? The brightness of the moon allowing you to walk through the night, but then sometimes there's no clouds in the sky during the day, and the sun is so bright that you're like, I'll go out later when the sun begins to set, right? When it's 12 or 1, and the sun is just blasting right up in your face. You're like, this is too bright. So there's a balance of lightness. So remember that. When you're dealing with Nietzsche, you're dealing with a lot of symbolism, allegory, metaphor, different ways in which you can interpret his text, which makes it quite fun. But he, you know it, you old priest, there was something of your manner about him. Of the priest's manner, he was equivocal. He was also indistinct. How angry he got with us, this wrath snorter. Now, a wrath snorter, what does he mean by that? Think about that. Now, fire and brimstone sermons used to be more popular back in the day. Not so much. Now, you got a lot of liberal Christians, a lot of bleeding heart Christians who say, don't judge, and he who is without sin cast the first stone. They take stuff and twist it so that you have to permit everything. Okay? Now, the wrath snorter sermons, I read one long ago on the channel. I don't know if it's still up. But they used to be like, you will burn here, and like they would try to scare their flock in a good way. You know? And this can get the fire in you of like, yes, this is motivational. But snorting is like a, it's not a pleasant sound. So if you're saying wrath and you're snorting, it's like a barking type of sound wave. It's not pleasant to the ear. But when you can speak of wrath with a smooth tongue, with great oration, with proper rhetoric, give great admonitions, because it's so smooth, it'll be more listened to by the human ear. The human ear, when it comes to speech, it has to be entertained. But if something's an unpleasant sound, even if the message is good, it's hard for people to pay attention, right? And so when Nietzsche uses a line like wrath snorter, he's really combining these two phrases here that can make you picture like a rabid boar If you've ever heard a boar is a pig, squeal and wail, it can be very unpleasant. Sometimes the braying of a donkey can be as well. But remember, boars bite. They'll maul your hunting dog. They're very tough. So when you hear them snorting in the woods, like in Texas, you gotta be careful because they might bite you. They're not like the pink domesticated pigs. Because we understood him badly. But why did he not speak more cleanly? See what I just said? So why did he not speak more cleanly? Clean, smooth, it's crisp. Snorting is more short, bombastic. Like, it's more choppy. But when something is more clear, like think of a smooth stream. When someone has the art of rhetoric, the art of being able to deliver a strong, potent message to where your ears are receptive and they don't turn off, this is a very unique trait. And if it was the fault of our ears, why did he give us ears that hurt him badly? If there was mud in our ears, well, who put it there? He bungled too much, this potter, who had never finished his apprenticeship, but that he wreaked revenge on his pots and creations for having bungled them himself. That was a sin against good taste. There is good taste and piety too, and it was this that said in the end, away with such a god, rather no god, rather make destiny one's own, rather be a fool, rather be a god oneself. Now here you see something interesting where Nietzsche really struggles, I think. He's disgusted by the Christians of his time, with religion as a whole. Now, the hypocrisy he mentioned, corruption, like where the elders of the churches, the clergy, they don't follow their own rules. It can really give fodder to the enemies of religion. We all sin, but you're always hoping that those who are appointed and anointed to lead the people in religious things, that they don't stumble as much as everyone else. But to err is human. But here you can see this rebelliousness coming out. Rather make destiny one's own. This is where you get into a little bit of Luciferianism and occultism, because you can't do that. Some humans have really tried hard to make the world their own. Now, there's just so much around us. Like, if you think about this, let me explain something here. Let me really go deep on this line. Black Mirror has a new season on Netflix. I give it 2 stars. The first episode was okay, the rest was pretty much garbage. Not really creative. Sorry. But the point is this, they did chips. It's all about brain chips and the digital realm. And in one episode, there's a crazy lady who was bullied as a nerd in school. Assalamu alaikum, Estrada. Assalamu alaikum, unknown. There's a lady in the Black Mirror episode who is a nerd. She builds herself a supercomputer and some type of device she holds in her hand that can change the reality around her, and she can change her life. And in one of the scenes, on the mantle, there's her as an astronaut, her on the cover of Vogue. There's a painting of her as some type of goddess where men are worshiping her. Okay? And then this scene later on, the episode ends with the protagonist, main character, becoming a sort of woman to be worshipped. That she changed with this computer device the reality around her and was able to shape everything to her own will. So the Black Mirror season is all about shaping with using... This is the simulation theory. There's people who believe in the simulation theory, that we live inside a computer. So the whole season of Black Mirror is brain chips and artificial intelligence, AI, computer stuff. And in that realm, you can shape the world how you want it. The whole season revolves around that. The guy with the throng who has a video game, and then the video game gains consciousness. He builds a supercomputer, and he helps them with a code to escape into the earthly realm. Then there's like a black lesbo who goes into this digital world of a vintage movie and communicates with the characters and can shape and change the reality around her. You know, so the whole season of Black Mirror is dealing with making destiny one's own, right? Some like them unknown. And so when you see this line from Nietzsche, he was a bit ahead of his time because he can perceive the human's desire to shape reality. Now, us as Muslims, what do we say? Something very unique. I'm a slave of Allah. Bonjour, ça demande. Okay? We say we're a slave of Allah. Now, that's a very potent term. Why so? Because you're acknowledging you are not in control fully of what happens to you, and we're not allowed to go to some soothsayer who's going to listen to the lie of a jinn sprinkled with a little bit of truth and confuse us. We don't go to psychics. We don't go to palm readers, tarot card readers, fortune tellers, astrologers, numerologists. We don't do that shenanigans. And if you are doing it, you got to stop. But there has always been humans' serious desire to find some type of gypsy, some type of occultist, some type of witch, and some type of wizardish person who's going to tell you what's your destiny so that you can shape it. Shakespeare's Macbeth, he went to the witches, right? And there's a whole thing there. Cersei Lannister in Game of Thrones, she found Lady Mag, what was her name? The frog? I forget. She went into the woods and the witch told her, you will have 3 children with crowns of gold, their hair. And she didn't tell her her destiny. But the witch has a line that says, you know, most people want to know their fortune until they know it, right? So even in fiction, we see the human desire to seek out what their future holds. When for us, we say, you know, trust in Allah and have hope in the last day and focus on doing good deeds. That's what you can do. And pray for forgiveness and have, you know, do things where your sins will be forgiven. That's how you can become better. Don't seek out the fortune teller, the people who try to find the secret codes of the universe or something like that. No. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already given you the map. You know, already given you a map. Because when you try to make your destiny your own, that's when you can get into occultism. That's when you start to think of yourself as a god, right? So he's right when he said, rather be a fool, rather be a god oneself. So if you start seeking how to make destiny your own, then you'll go into this sort of apostasy, heresy of thinking you're a god yourself, that you can shape your reality. You know what I mean? So this is a very dense line, and Luciferians have a line that they say, do as thou wilt. So they have a lot of strangeness to them, but the point is, the human condition of the paradox of you can choose left or right, but you don't know when you're going to return to Allah. You don't know if you'll be rich or poor. None of us, when we see a baby, can predict its future. And remember, don't get this confused with the entrepreneurial spirit. The entrepreneur says, I'm going to go out and make my own business. MashaAllah, tabarakallah, right? There's no problem in that, if Allah permits. That's why we say, inshallah, if Allah wills. We don't say, I'll make my own destiny. We have to be careful. You know, language is so profound because language is like our code of how we communicate with ourselves and with the people around us. And it shapes the way in which we perceive the world. Language is very fascinating. So, you'll see this is also a feministic, because the feminists will say, I don't need a man. I'm a strong and independent, empowered woman. And I'm a goddess, they say. Oh, I'm a main character energy. So what happens to these women? Their ego becomes super high, their standards are to the moon, and then what happens? Reality hits them. You're 40, no one wants you. Men did a wham bam, thank you ma'am. You're strung out. You're just a nasty, vulgar old lady like Chelsea Handler who, ugh, it's just, ugh, it's just really gross. So, something to that. Or you become, remember in Folklore, there was always that weird lady in the woods with a bunch of cats, who wasn't safe around the children and who gave bad advice to the young, beautiful virgins, right? Think about Ursula and the Little Mermaid from the classical Disney example. This lady is like a witch, right? She takes away the voice of Ariel. You know, she tried to be a controlling a person of people's destinies and thought if she was like a god who could control the affairs of the merfolk. Fiction has a lot of funny examples for us to dig into. What is this I hear? Said the old pope at this point, pricking up his ears. O Zarathustra, with such disbelief you are more pious than you believe. Some god in you must have converted you to your godlessness. Is it not your piety itself that no longer lets you believe in a god? And your overgreat honesty will yet lead you beyond good and evil too. You can never go beyond good and evil. That's the binary of our world. You can't escape that. Okay, like there's nuance. Like if you have a hammer, it can be used for good and evil, but you can't go beyond the good and evil because the intention in the object shapes the reality around you. Because those are objects of utility, objects of function, and when they are used, they either create a negative result or a positive result. So I don't think you can escape good and evil. That's the binary of our world, and that's what we'll be judged by. Our deeds. So good and evil are related to our deeds. While we're here on earth, we have to do good deeds. On Judgment Day, there will be scales to weigh our good and bad deeds. That's the binary of good and evil for us humans. Now, animals are held to a different standard that we don't know of. Okay? Because animals act more on instinct and impulse than humans. Even though we have instinct and impulse. We have a totally different consciousness. Okay? And we are above the animal creation. And so we are burdened with a different standard that we have to live up to by our good deeds. And deeds are measured in either good or evil. So, positive, negative. So you can't escape that. Behold, what remains to you? You have eyes and hands and a mouth, predestined for blessing from all eternity. One does not bless with the hand alone. Near you, although you want to be the most godless, I scent a secret, sacred, pleasant scent of long blessing. It gives me gladness and grief. Let me be your guest, O Zarathustra, for one single night. Nowhere on earth shall I now feel better than with you. Amen, so be it, said Zarathustra, in great astonishment. Up there goes the way. There lies Zarathustra's cave. I should indeed like to accompany you. Were myself, you venerable one, for I love all who are pious. But now a cry of distress urgently calls me away from you. So, if you've been following along, he keeps getting these urgent cries of distress, and then he wants to be able to go and see what's happening with the people. And this is how he encounters all these different characters. He gets to encounter all kinds of people by answering the call. In my realm, no one shall come to grief. My cave is a good haven. And I wish that I could put everyone who is sad back on firm land and firm legs. That's true, I think there's a point in humanity where you see someone sad and you're like, dang man, wish I could help that person. And you try to cheer them up. But some people, there's a comedian named Tra Rags. He had a very funny skit where one of his friends was sad, and he tried to say everything to cheer the guy up, and then the guy wasn't cheering up, and then at the end he just starts cursing out his friend because he won't buck up. But I'm butchering it, but it's a very funny thing about some people wallow in misery, others just need a good ear so they can have a sort of cathartic experience, get that stress off their mind, and then they level up. They pull themselves out of the muck and buck. Others, not so much. So, it's an interesting thing. But who could take your melancholy off your shoulders? For that I am too weak. Verily, we might wait long before someone awakens your God again. For this old God lives no more. He is thoroughly dead. Thus spoke Zarathustra. Now, what does he mean here? Let's examine this for a second. Okay. Now, he does a lot of wordplay here. Okay. So, melancholy, taking it off the shoulders. We often have a phrase like, the weight on your shoulders is heavy, you say to somebody, right? The responsibility that someone has to bear. And when you are sad, Astara says vampires are everywhere these days. True. Peter says, is there any vampire or Dracula around today near 2025? Where are they? They're in New Orleans. You can look up their cults. Well, actually, don't look it up. But yeah, the blood, yeah. Let's not, I don't want to be scary. But yeah, there's people who do that openly. They're in New Orleans, Louisiana. They're all up in voodoo and stuff. I remember watching a documentary on their weirdness years ago. But and then obviously the upper elites have their weirdness rituals as well that Lady Gaga hints at. Let's not get too dark, shall we? But yes, that's haram. We don't believe to do that behavior. But yes, there are people who believe in drinking such fluid. Okay. Now, when someone is sad, sometimes they want to stay sad. I know how weird that can sound. When someone's melancholy, it's not depression, it's sadness. Now, sometimes you'll get bad news for a little bit, right? Let's say you had a bad customer at work. It's going to take you a little bit of while to renew that energy, revamp yourself, and sometimes a good coworker can make you laugh and reset the mood for the day. So they were able to eliminate the melancholy in you so that you can be progressing on your work, right? And you have to remember, it's not everyone's duty to be your court jester. It's not everyone's duty to make you happy. You gotta also learn how to shift your mood. And some people, shifting their mood is like moving a mountain. It's nearly impossible. So think about that. And you won't have the strength and mental energy to be someone's emotional tampon, to be someone's emotional dumping ground for all their stuff, right? Now when he says here, verily, we might wait long before someone awakens your God again. Now, we don't use terminologies like that. Okay? But it might take time for someone to find themselves again, their strength, the best version of themselves. But while that melancholy is on their shoulders, they're not the best version of themselves. So you could take this word, awakens your God, to mean to be the best version, the prime version of yourself. That's not terminology that we use, but that is how you would understand what Nietzsche is getting at in this section. For this old God lives no more, he is thoroughly dead. Thus spoke Zarathustra. Now, he's done with the retired section. This section is now titled, The Ugliest Man. And again, Zarathustra's feet ran over mountains and through woods, and his eyes kept seeking. But he whom they wanted to see was nowhere to be seen. The great distressed one who had cried out all along the way, however, Zarathustra jubilated in his heart, and he was grateful. What good things, he said, has this day given me to make up for its bad beginning? What strange people have I found to talk with? Now I shall long chew their words like good grains. My teeth shall grind them and crush them small till they flow like milk into my soul. But when the path turned around a rock again, the scenery changed all at once, and Zarathustra entered a realm of death. Black and red cliffs rose rigidly. No grass, no tree, no bird's voice. Sounds like San Francisco. For it was a valley that all animals avoided, even the beasts of prey. Only a species of ugly, fat green snakes came here to die when they grew old. Therefore the shepherds called this valley Snake's Death. Zarathustra, however, sank into a black reminiscence, for he felt as if he had stood in this valley once before, and much that was grave weighed on his mind. He walked slowly, and still more slowly, and finally stood still. But when he opened his eyes, he saw something sitting by the way, shaped like a human being, yet scarcely like a human being. Something inexpressible, and all at once a profound sense of shame came over Zarathustra for having laid eyes on such a thing. Blushing right up to his white hair, he averted his eyes and raised his feet to leave this dreadful place. But at that moment, the dead waste land was filled with noise, for something welled up from the ground, gurgling and rattling, as water gurgles and rattles by night in clogged water pipes. And at last it became a human voice and human speech, thus: Zarathustra, Zarathustra, guess my riddle. Speak, speak, what is the revenge against the witness? I lure you back, here is slippery ice. Take care that your pride does not break its legs here. You think yourself wise, proud Zarathustra, then guess the riddle, you cracker of hard nuts. The riddle that I am. Speak then, who am I? Ooh, so intense. Peter, since today live is about speech, let me quote a hadith about speech. Okay. Ahmed, I love you for the sake of Allah. My sister was following you even before you converted to Islam, and I knew you would become a Muslim. MashaAllah, glad to see you here. But when Zarathustra had heard these words, what do you suppose happened to his soul? Pity seized him, and he sank down all at once, like an oak tree that has long resisted many woodcutters, heavy, suddenly terrifying even those who had wanted to fell it. But immediately he rose from the ground again, and his face became hard. Now, a lot of these oak trees, they take a long time to grow, and when they grow, they are quite beautiful, but they take time. I recognize you well, he said in a voice of bronze. You are the murderer of God. Let me go. You could not bear him who saw you, who always saw you through and through. You ugliest man. You took revenge on this witness. Thus spoke Zarathustra, and he wanted to leave, but the inexpressible one seized a corner of his garment and began again to gurgle and seek for words. Stay, he said finally. Stay. Do not pass by. I have guessed what axe struck you to the ground. Hail to you, O Zarathustra, that you stand again. You have guessed, I know it well, how he who killed him feels. The murderer of God, stay, sit down here with me. Now, when you see this, you can read that like, well, obviously, what human can kill a god? I mean, Christians believe that humans can whip, flog and make God bleed, they think, we don't believe in that, But I think a great way to look at this would be how a human being can puncture the aura, the awness around an individual who's very powerful in what they do. So they know how to bring down someone off their high horse in a very potent manner. Stay, sit down here with me. It's not for nothing. Whom did I want to reach? If not you, stay, sit down. But do not look at me. In that way honor my ugliness. So don't look at me, honor my ugliness. So, this is an interesting one here. There's an episode of Smiling Friends. I really like that show because it's very weird. Smiling Friends has an episode where they're in a land and they speak Spanish. Not Spanish, Spanish. And the leader of this weird land, he's a giant eye. His face is a giant eye. And he deletes anyone who looks in his eye. Okay? And he's very insecure. And Pip, I believe his name was, he was a pen pal to this guy back in the day. And he said a prayer in Spanish and he gets spared. And then the ruler of this land he changes things, okay? And, the episode ends in a very funny way where there's all this destruction. But it was interesting that the eye didn't want to be looked at, and then because he was insecure about the way he looked, right? And since he's the king, you have to honor his request to not look at him in the eye. And then there's an episode, like in the episode, a mosquito comes, lands on his giant eye, and it's hard not to stare at the mosquito drinking from his eye. And he's like, did you look at my eye? And he's like, no, I didn't look at it. But it's really funny how, there's a balance of don't stare too much, but look, lower your gaze, but eye contact in business deals is important. If you evade eyes, they think you are up to something, right? But there's also people who can lie to you straight face. So eye contact is very interesting when you just look at it on the grand scheme of things. Okay? It's very interesting how... Okay, let's do an example. Muhammad Hijab didn't look at Michaela Peterson too much in the eyes when they were having a dialogue, and Michaela Peterson was pissed. She was very upset about that. Because a woman knows if she makes excessive eye contact with a man, and she's pretty or attractive, her sexual energy can manipulate him. And some men have noticed when a really lewdly dressed woman is in front of them and the man doesn't look at them, they get more attracted to him because they're being ignored, and they're so used to slapping away simps who fly to them like mosquitoes to the lamp that they get disgusted by the men who are always flocking to them, and the one that ignores them, avoids eye contact, they find to be super attractive because now they gotta pursue him, and that it makes them feel good. It's fascinating, just this whole thing. So when there's a line here that says, but don't look at me, in that way honor my ugliness, you can really look at that. And also, people have pain, and they don't want you to see their pain, like, don't look at me. But there's also creepy people who stare and they don't have no good manners, and you're like, what are you looking at? I remember one time we were at the grocery store, this guy, he was from Guatemala. He had one of the most creepiest stares in the world, where too much of the eye, the white part of your eyeballs? If a woman looks at you and the top of the white is showing, she's mostly crazy. But when the bottom white part is showing, this seems like a very demonic energy. I can't explain it. But I remember loading up the groceries in the truck, and then As we're pulling away, this guy is staring at my husband, but it's one of the most creepiest stares that I still can picture vividly in my head. His face was nonchalant. It was like a face carved in the base of a tree, like a mask. I don't know how to put it. You know those tribal masks? And it just, the way he stared, it was like the evil eye, but it wasn't like this, yeah, it wasn't like that kind of evil eye. It was like, I don't even know how to explain it. It was just freaky, okay? And there was a piece of me that is like, I want to slap that guy and be like, what are you looking at? Stop staring at us. But some people, they don't know how to control their gaze. So they have to be reminded. They have to be reminded. You know, like when a white girl goes to India, you know, these guys will follow her around. You'll see like 20 Indian men taking pictures of this white chick who's just being a tourist. And they follow her around and want to take a selfie with her. And they follow her like it's freaky. Like get away. Like, this is insane. But some people, they don't know how to control their gaze. There's also some rulers, historically, they don't want the peasant to look them in the eye. It was a sign of disrespect, you know? So, eye contact is such a unique subject. And I'm sure if you've ever seen someone who's really ugly, sometimes your eyes avoid looking at them because you don't want to hurt their feelings. You don't want to make them feel awkward, right? But some women, if you don't look at them, then they feel ugly. It's like you can't win. But again, it's a very fascinating thing to think about. This line here, you can go off on many introspective adventures, right? They persecute me. Now you are my last refuge. Not with their hatred, not with their catchpoles. I would mock such persecution and be proud and glad of it. Has not all success hitherto been with the well persecuted? And whoever persecutes well learns readily how to follow. Now here you see a very interesting example. If you learn to persecute well, you learn how to follow readily, because you know what's possible. For he is used to going after somebody else, but it is their pity. It is their pity that I flee, fleeing to you, O Zarathustra. Protect me, you, my last refuge, the only one who has solved my riddle. You guessed how he who killed him feels. Stay, and if you would go, you impatient one, do not go the way I came. That way is bad. Are you angry with me that I have even now stammered too long, and even advise you? But no, it is I, the ugliest man, who has the largest and heaviest feet. Where I have gone, the way is bad. I tread all ways, so they are dead and ruined. Very interesting section here. Assalamu alaikum, Jessica. The ugliest man with the heaviest feet. Now, what's interesting is you look at the hobbits. They were small, but they got big old feet. There's something about the feet. You know, people will be like, you got soft feet, you're a tenderfoot. But if you look at humans, I've read a whole book about feet, about the bone structure and how our shape of feet have changed over time. I read that a book about 8 years ago. Oh, I wish I could remember the title. It was an anthropology book. Has a footprint on the cover. I put it in the recycle bin years ago. Can't keep every book. But it is fascinating how the shape of our feet has changed with us when we started to wear shoes. And when we used to have thicker calluses on our feet from trudging on hard surfaces, long distances, you know, we were more tougher, our feet. Now our feet are more soft. It's very interesting. You know, we get blisters more easily now, and our skin is very delicate. I mean, there's a whole thing around it. So when he mentions here heaviest feet that are also large, and that makes them ugly, you feel this sort of primitiveness because the more hardened and wide and flat-footed you are, you can tell, pardon me, what kind of life you came from. What's interesting is that I'll see city people's feet, right? Like there's some men who you see their feet and they're a different shape than people who came from rural areas. My voice is pardon me, sorry. They're I'm trying to explain the best way. Okay, look at an indigenous person of Australia's feet. Then go to somebody who's had 6, 7 generations of living in the city. Look at his feet. They're different. They're a different shape. They're not flat and wide. It's really fascinating. And women will be like, oh, that's ugly. Some women, at least. They'll be like, that's ugly. Why doesn't he have modern feet? And then there's men who, they have a foot fetish. They want the woman to have really soft, small feet. And that if they get like a tall woman, like pearly things, they got these like monster feet, they're not attracted to her. It's very fascinating, you know. It's if a woman, there's like a pumice stone where you can shave the dead skin off, and like manicures, pedicures, the Japanese, the Asians, Filipinos, people from Thailand, the women try to have really nice feet because feet is a part of female beauty. And then when you look at a man who's more primal, more Tarzanish, like he's into bushcraft, he's a mountain man, his feet are a different texture, different shape than the financial or tech bro who his feet are always on carpet and always in cushioned shoes. So the feet can tell you a lot. Now, let me explain further. With the Freemasons, why did they wear gloves back in the day? The men wore gloves so you couldn't tell what kind of work they do. Why is that? Because there used to be a stigma around men who worked with their hands. Because their hands had calluses, were rough, right? You were a laborer. Versus someone who works in a bank, an office, a classroom, an artist painting. Your hands are softer because they're not being tested. So in order to make more equality among the Masons, so that they would remove stigma, people would wear gloves. So you could not judge them by their hands. You couldn't look down upon your fellow Mason because his hands were more roughed up than yours. So when this ugly person says, just talking about his feet, there's a lot of layers to that. A lot of layers. It's fascinating. Really, truly is. But that you passed by me silent, that you blushed, I saw it well. That is how I recognized you as Zarathustra. Everyone else would have thrown his arms to me, his pity, with his eyes and words. For that I am not beggar enough, as you guessed. For that I am too rich, rich in what is great, in what is terrible, in what is ugliest, in what is most inexpressible. Your shame, Zarathustra, honored me. With difficulty I escaped the throng of pitying to find the only one today who teaches pity is obtrusive. You, O Zarathustra. Whether it be a god's pity or man's, pity offends the sense of shame. And to be unwilling to help can be nobler than the virtue which jumps to help. That's an interesting line. Alright. Assalamu alaikum, Saul. Saul says, true, my father was a porter. His hands are practically mangled at his age. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't like, we in Islam can't handshake. Okay? You can't handshake in Islam. Men and women can't do handshakes. But back when I was a server and you go for a job interview, it's kind of, you have to shake the hand of the person interviewing you, right? And shaking the hand of a soft manager with a pot belly always felt gross. I really started hating being forced to, shake hands with men. But I remember one time there was a line cook. I shook his hand, but he was from rural Mexico, and his hands were like the bone structure was different. He had a tight grip, and I was like, "Dang man, you're gonna break my hand." But I mean, it was fascinating to see the difference of someone who comes from rural Mexico, from the farming lifestyle, versus someone who's been a manager of a restaurant and is super soft. It's like I felt more comfortable, even though the farmer guy had a grip, farmer line cook had a stronger grip. It felt more rustic and primal than the soft man. Like, you kind of feel like you're petting a snake when a man has soft hands. So, alhamdulillah for Islam, we women don't have to shake men's hands. But when men shake hands, there's like a power dynamic there. Gripping, who's gonna let go first, the awkwardness of the situation. So me as a woman putting me to shake a man's hand is just retarded, you know. Saul says there is a ton of faculty maintenance, cleaning, and transporting heavy objects. I tried his work. Now I understand why he was in shape for so long. That's true. Yes, that's really true, right? They get to move around a lot. Very true. Now notice here though that he said, and to be willing to help can be nobler than that virtue which jumps to help. Unwillingness to help, jumping to help. That's a paradoxical phrase right there. Really is. But today that is called virtue itself. Among all the little people, pity. So he's talked a lot about pity. And I think many of us in our lives. Okay, I'm gonna give an example. Okay, so he said here, unwilling to help can be nobler than the virtue which jumps to help. There will be a time in your life where you may be down on your luck. You want help and humanity. You don't want pity. Pity feels a bit more condescending, you know? Estada says a woman shaking a hand with a man is what? It's haram. You can't do it. So, if you've ever had that condescending gaze of pity, it doesn't feel very good. Pity and mercy and empathy often get mixed up. So it's very interesting angle here Nietzsche has for us. Full of good wool and good will, as a heron looks away contemptuously over shallow ponds, its head leaning back, thus I look away over the teeming mass of grey little waves and wills and souls. Too long have we conceded to them that they are right, these little people, so that in the end we have also conceded them might. Now they teach. Good is only what little people call good. And today truth is what the preacher said, who himself came from among them, the strange saint, an advocate of the little people, who bore witness about himself. I am the truth. This immodest fellow has long given the little people swelled heads. Swelled heads. That's another way of saying, like, puffed up egos. Like too much of a self-importance, right? He who taught no small error when he taught, I am truth. Has an immodest fellow ever been answered more politely? You, however, O Zarathustra, passed him by and said, no, no, 3 times no. You warned against his error. You, as the first, warned against pity, not all. None but you, your kind. You are ashamed of the shame of the great sufferer, and verily, when you say, from pity, a great cloud approaches. Beware, O men, when you teach, all creators are hard. All great love is over and above its pity. O Zarathustra, how well you seem to me to understand storm signs. But you warn yourself also against your pity. For many are on their way to you, many who are suffering, doubting, despairing, drowning, freezing. Now, notice this. Warn yourself against your pity. Let me give you an example. There's a show called American Primeval. There's a scene where the female character, who's the mom of the boy who... there's a girl, she's stranded with her dolly. Okay? The guide, his name is... Aaron, maybe? I forget. Eric? I forget. But he tells her, leave that girl there. And the woman says, I can't just, basically she's saying, you can't just leave her here. We have to find her parents. Look, she's so innocent. And he says, listen, do you hear anyone calling for her? If you lost your kid, you'd be screaming your head off, basically, looking for them. He has suspicions about this strange girl with her dolly. But the lady doesn't listen. She picks up the girl. They go searching for the parents. They go into the camp. A French guy's there. He says, like, oh, you brought my daughter back. Thank you. Yada yada. Stay for dinner. Stay, let us host you. And they're like, oh, no, we gotta get going. And then suddenly, that French guy and everyone in the camp pulls out a weapon and robs them. The little girl, was bait. Where she would pretend to be lost and then lead them into a trap to be robbed. And the main female character ends up getting R-worded, and her son's tied to a tree, and it's a hard lesson for her, but she refused to listen to the scout. Right? Saul Heyman says pity is practically pity as a softener for hard decisions. It becomes a weakness if not thoughtfully used. Exactly. And so this lady took pity on this girl, which at first you're like, oh, good, but the girl was a trap to lead her to a base camp to get pillaged of their goods. Okay? They end up escaping, but that woman obviously gets R-worded, and it's a horrible experience. But her stubbornness, she thought the guy was cruel. She thought her guide was cruel. He didn't take pity on this little girl. But she was blinded by pity and led into a trap. Right? But the guy could see this is a suspicious scenario. Okay? This is not, something's not right here in this picture. Right? So, think about it. Saul Heyman says, excessive compassion is what led to good people getting taken advantage of. Very true. Very true. And so, when Nietzsche mentions here, but you warn yourself also against your pity. So you have to be thinking about it, you know? He has a point there. Like, think about a woman who goes... Okay, this is a great example. You go to a dog shelter, you see a pit bull, and you're like, that poor pit bull, you know, the owner didn't want it. I'm gonna go ahead and take it in. The person at the facility says, oh yeah, we did the hand test at the food bowl. This dog is good to go. You know, totally bring the dog around your family. It's a rescue. It's immoral to buy from a breeder. It's more moral to adopt. Adopt, don't shop. So you're like, okay, I feel pity for the shelter dog. I'm gonna adopt it. You bring the dang thing home. It has a certain tick. Something sets the dog off that you didn't know was there. Because when you buy a puppy from a breeder, you can ask questions. How's the mom? How's the dad? What's the genealogy of this critter? You can watch the puppies play. You can watch the dog, all that stuff. But when a dog's at a shelter, you have no genetic background, no personality profile to examine with the dog fully, right? Sure, they do vetting, but they're not vetting enough. And then that pit bull decides to maul the mailman. And you're like, oh my goodness. Wow. So you ignored the statistics about pit bulls in general. And shelter dogs are often traumatized and discarded. And they're not mentally stable. They're like the asylum dogs. You know? If you brought a person home from a mental asylum, it's going to be kind of weird, ain't it, to have them as a roommate. Because they're not socialized. And shelter dogs, depending on how long they've been there, what lifestyle they came from, they can be quite crazy. But you had pity on that dog, and now that dog mauled the mailman. And you called everybody who told you, don't buy a pit bull, don't get a pit bull. You called them all sorts of names. But your pity, what did it lead to? The mailman getting mauled. Saul Heyman says, what happens when a criminal comes from an abusive background? A judge may go soft and repeat offender walks free. I won't call for cruelty, but we need good conviction in the face of injustice. That's a very good point. That's really hard. Yeah, a lot of lawyers use that. Saul Heyman says, Islam has a good balance. Yeah, it's fascinating how they take someone's childhood into account. And then they're like, you came from a rough life, so we'll give you a chance. And then that person does become a repeat offender. It's pretty wild. Yeah, the justice system is really difficult to manage. Really. But he had to die. He saw with his eyes that saw everything. He saw man's depths and ultimate grounds, all his concealed disgrace and ugliness. His pity knew no shame. He crawled into my dirtiest nooks. This most curious, over-obtrusive, over-pitying one had to die. He always saw me on such a witness. I wanted to have revenge, or not live myself. The God who saw everything, even man. This God had to die. Man cannot bear it, that such a witness should live. Thus spoke the ugliest man, but Zarathustra rose and was about to leave, for he felt frozen down to his very entrails. You inexpressible one, he said, you have warned me against your way. In thanks I shall praise mine to you. Behold, up there lies Zarathustra's cave. My cave is large and deep and has many nooks. Even the most hidden can find a hiding place there. And close by there are 100 dens and lodges for crawling, fluttering, and jumping beasts. You self-exiled exile, would you not live among men, and men's pity? Well then, do as I do. Thus you also learn from me. Only the doer learns. Only the doer learns. That's a really interesting angle. Don't talk about it, be about it. And speak first of all to my animals. Remember he said that in the last chapter when he was talking about the serpent and the eagle? The proudest animal and the wisest animal. They should be the righteous counselors of the two of us. Aha, see, he touched back. So remember I told you the proudest was the eagle. Dang, man, I was on point. Mashallah tabarakallah. And then the wisest, the serpent. So it's right over here. Serpent. The eagle. Thus spoke Zarathustra, and he went his way, still more reflectively and slowly than before. For he asked himself much, and he did not know how to answer himself readily. How poor man is, after all, he thought in his heart. How ugly, how wheezing, how full of hidden shame. I have been told that man loves himself. Ah, how great must this love self be! How much contempt stands against it! This fellow, too, loved himself even as he despised himself. A great lover, he seems to me, and a great despiser. A great lover and a great despiser. There's that duality there. None have I found yet who despised himself more deeply. That, too, is a kind of height. Alas, was he perhaps the higher man whose cry I heard? I love the great despisers. Man, however, is something that must be overcome. Very interesting section. Very interesting section. Okay. The next section is the voluntary beggar, but we'll pause here. And again, the phrases of you self-exiled exile. Okay? You inexpressible one. And that to despise yourself very deeply is a kind of height. And being able to examine your own wretchedness, that can be something. But you don't want to have super, super low self-esteem because then you become crippled. Very interesting. He dealt a lot with pity. Saul Heyman says, he who cannot despise cannot love. Ha ha! That's a good one. Right? Peter says, like a mother frantically searching for her missing child. Takira al-Sami, page 3. It's interesting. Warn yourself also against your pity. Fascinating section. Okay? I hope you really enjoyed this because, Nietzsche gets you thinking. And he can make your mind go in a lot of places. And, I gotta say, I read a lot. And the influencers of today, they just are becoming more watered down. And you can see why the past, people were just more in tune with reality, The dumbing down of civilization is quite high. Saul says, Nietzsche has mistrust for soft sentimental morality, huh? He references Christianity a ton. Great book. Yeah. Yes, he does. I don't think he's a friend of Christians, man, because he's really dug into them. Heavily. And I always feel that Islam has a sense of strength to it, which Christians are deeply afraid of. But you do have this resurgence of the frogs, the people with the frog icons, some Christians on the right wing, the Fuentes types. They are trying to connect with the Viking energy, but the Vikings were very pagan. They were, raiders, the Nordics. Yeah, they're trying to reinvent themselves. And I just the Nick crowd. Yeah, the Nick crowd. Yeah, I follow a lot of them just to see what they talk about, right? Because you got like a Matt Walsh. Yeah, no, Nick is Catholic, yeah. But I'm just trying to talk about the ethos. There's like how do I explain it? There's starting to be a trickle of this sort of pagan-esque, tough Christian energy. Like I had a troll the other day, like tag me on Instagram and say, "Did you ever hear about the Crusades?" And I'm like, you Christians have built your imagery around pacifism, about turn the other cheek, wash the feet of your enemies. The Pope gets on his knees and kisses feet. That's your image. Your image isn't strength. Your image is love your enemy. No. It's not conquer your enemy. Saul says, I see the Nordic Scandinavian ethos in modern West form. Yeah. Like they're trying to take that model of the sagas. Cringe, but I can grasp it. Yeah. Like the energy of the sagas, of the Nordic sagas, and then trying to put a Christian model on that ethos. And it doesn't really mesh, because if you look historically, it was the Catholics who went and murked. They went and warred with those Danes. They went and dominated those Nordic peoples and wiped all that out. It took time. It was fierce, right? But they did it over time, taking over. So it's funny that the frogs of the Fuentes, they're trying to merge those two, but then you'll hear them talk about how brutal the Aztecs were and how brutal the Mayans were. But you're like, do you guys they're very confused, some of them, because they want to be feared, but their whole thing is about being soft. So when Nietzsche is taking digs at them for being soft, you can see why, right? So it says Catholicism didn't last long in Scandinavia. A few centuries at most, the church lost power by the early modern period. Interesting. Yeah. It was just a different time for them. But I do see a resurgence of Christians wanting to be tough again. And I think that's what the MAGA movement has also tried to do. The sort of neoconservative war hawk policies. They struggle. The Christians are so split up. I'm not saying Islam is all united, but they don't know where they want their moral compass to be. Do you want to be pacifists like the modern Pope, kissing feet, coddling? Or are they trying to be like the Templars, But the Templars were a heretical group that the Catholic Church fought against later on. So make it make sense. Make it make sense. And the Crusades means active warfare. But Christians, some of them, their hair gets on fire when they talk about Muslims having a militaristic aspect to our religion of jihad. So they're very contradictory. They want Christians to be tougher and have a military as some popes did, but they also want to be seen as hippie people. It don't make no sense. I like orthodoxy, but ultimately the church is corrupt. At least they didn't sell out like the Zios Christians. Yeah. It's funny. There's a debate coming up between AP and Andrew Wilson on should Orthodox Christians support is not real. Support the Zios. I don't know if it's going to be on YouTube, but I saw them selling tickets yesterday on X. And so we'll see how that debate goes. It's really quite fascinating. Saul says, I think Andrew Wilson should clear him. Andrew Wilson knows a lot about his religion. A rookie who just converted going up against somebody who is very into the Orthodox Christianity, you know, that's a big challenge. Andrew Wilson is much more competent. Yeah, we'll see what happens, because, you know, you're like, I made that mistake too. When I first converted, you get really excited and you want to prove your faith, but you're like, you gotta slow down and study. And now, you know, I realize I gotta study even more and leave hardcore debates on certain topics to certain people, you know. For example, when Jake Bracatella and Daniel Hakikachu were going at it over Akita issues, I was like, hey, I don't know what you guys are talking about. That's not my wheelhouse. So I'm going to just stick to talking about what I talk about. Right? But it is fascinating how some people, they jump the gun, you know? So it says, likewise, when I reverted, I jumped on any chance to talk about Islam. Yeah. You get that sort of happiness inside of you and excitedness, but you got to know how to rein it in. You know? So I've done that more now. And I'll speak from what I know, and I have no problem telling someone, you know, I'm not familiar with that. You're going to have to find, you know, refer to the experts on that, or seek a student of knowledge who can inform you. This is what I know, and here's what I don't know. But a lot of people never want to admit what they don't know, right? And as I think Nietzsche would point out, it's all right to admit you don't know something, right? You know what I mean? Okay, I'm gonna go get some lunch going. The children and their father are at martial arts training, so I need to have lunch ready by the time they come back from MMA. Okay, so yeah, thanks for tuning in, everybody. Thanks, Saul, for being here. Always enjoy everyone commenting. Makes it even more exciting. And I don't always get to do lives, but I've been trying to use my free time to do that. So I was like, hey, let's do a live stream. But I gotta go cook now. Mashallah tabarakallah. Go cook up some grub. I have several things I can make, but I'm not sure which one I'm gonna do. So I need to get in front of the oven, the stove, and be like, what I'm gonna make today. Got lots of cooking to do. I gotta get lunch going, and then I gotta prep for dinner. Thanks, Peter, for being here too. Hope you all have a great day, and please like, comment, subscribe. Join the blog. Do it now. Bye-bye.